right?
Yeah.
Then turn it off, then turn on... actually, I'm going to turn on DJ so I can play the clip.
Yeah, so you want to turn on DJ first?
Yeah.
Then bring it up and bring the other one down.
Alright, I just cut them off.
That's fine. They're doing something separate. He records them separately and posts video and stuff.
Alright, I'm turning ours on now. Welcome to Cinema Smackdown. We are live on Sunday afternoon. What? Oh, here comes that clip again.
Are they still coming to get Barbara?
They're still coming for us, guys.
They will never leave Barbara alone. Poor Barbara.
Just for fun, let's say the date. It is Sunday, November 25th, I believe.
Well, the important thing is the year. What year is it?
It's 1968, at least as far as our clip is concerned.
That's a good year. That's a good year for movies.
And since we are hanging out in 1968, we are going to celebrate the 50th?
Math is hard.
50th anniversary of the release of Night of the Living Dead today.
Yay!
Yeah, it is...
the film that launched an entire subgenre.
Mm-hmm.
And an entire copyright infringement genre.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, we'll get into that as well.
My name is Michael Brody, and I am joined by Shane Simmons and Tess McCrae.
That's me.
We are here to delight you for the next hour or more if we're in the mood.
You can delight people. I'm going to probably try to bore them as much as possible.
Hey, if it works, stick with it. You're on brand. So Shane, this was your brainstorm here. We came up with.
Well, yeah, I was feeling remiss that I hadn't done anything for the 50th anniversary of Night of the Living Dead, which is George A. Romero's seminal original zombie masterpiece that was a slow launch to becoming its own subgenre. There was really nothing following Night of the Living Dead for years until Romero himself made his sequel, Dawn of the Dead. And then we were off to the races with a million branching sequels and a million imitators that were able to do so legally because of the little copyright oopsie that happened in 1968. If I can get into that briefly,
the whole thing.
Yeah, the original Night of the Living Dead was an extremely grisly film for its era, to the point where it was an independent film shot in Pittsburgh by a bunch of young people who had mostly worked in advertising. They weren't Hollywood mainstream people. So they made this film the way they wanted to make it, and then proceeded to not be able to get a distributor. A lot of distributors turned it down, saying, it's a little too icky, and the ending's a real downer. Maybe if you reshot the ending and made it a happy ending, and cut out some of the visceral, gutty, zombie chomping action, we could distribute this, and they didn't want to do that to their film. Eventually, they did find a distributor who was willing to take it on, but they didn't like the title. The original title was Night of the Flesh Eaters. And the only reason they didn't like the title is because there had been another film recently with a similar title. So they decided to
I thought you were going to say it was too sexual.
Yeah, this would have been the very early days of porn starting to go mainstream as well, so you never know. So they decided to retitle it Night of the Living Dead, famously. Now, in that era, it was common practice to include the copyright notice for a film right on the title card of the movie. So if you see a lot of films from the 60s and 70s, they're always title, copyright, whatever year, which is always a bit of an aesthetic, glitchy, ugly thing to have on your title card, but it was just a thing that was done for many years. When they switched the title, when the distributor switched the title, they forgot to include that copyright notice on the new title, Night of the Living Dead. And so everyone, it kind of de facto instantly went into public domain. Now, that didn't affect the original release of the film, but once the video era began, everyone basically assumed they were legally allowed to release any number of copies of Night of the Living Dead on VHS and later DVD, consequence-free. Not technically true, but they all got away with it anyway. And it also created a sort of intellectual copyright void for the film that in later years anyone could take Romero's monsters and the rules governing them and go ahead and make their own thing.
From the beginning of the film.
And audio clips, yeah. No one's coming to sue us for that one.
And to be clear, the entire AMC empire was built on that copyright.
Exactly. So probably the biggest property to crib Romero directly is The Walking Dead.
One more piece of trivia I read last night is that the film was released at a time when the MPAA rules for ratings and how movies were being divided up in age groups of people being let into films. It was released at a time when they were in flux.
Yes, the MPAA only came in November of 1968.
So
Night of the Living Dead came out a little before that.
Right. And
So children were allowed in.
Exactly. Roger Ebert's original Night of the Living Dead review mentions the fact that the children who were in the cinema
Were reduced to tears.
well, while he was watching his screening, probably shouldn't have had access to a movie that violent and gory. So,
Of course, by modern standards, kids today would consider it up there with Thomas the Tank Engine.
yeah,
It's
no kidding.
it is a real horror film in that there is no levity to it. It is
It takes it very seriously.
it is very serious, and it is grisly. Unfortunately, the things have ratcheted up so much since then. We now have a whole generation of little children who grew up on Saw movies.
Yeah, well, and
Yeah.
more on point on episodes of Walking Dead.
Yeah.
And I don't want to be a stodgy old dude here, but I guess I could say society has suffered as a result.
Well, it's a chicken or egg situation, I think, a little bit. But I think, at the time, the expectation was that it was going to be one of these kind of campy horror movies that would come out at the time and be played in theaters, and children would just get dropped off by their parents alone. It was a different era.
Well, to be fair,
see...
on the campy front, if you give the movie a screening, the first body they find in the film, I believe, is upstairs. They find a dead body, which is clearly just a mannequin with white ping pong ball eyes.
Yeah, well, his face has been peeled off, so
that's the goofiest imaginable.
Considering we see
early days of special effects.
Yeah, considering we see it on screen for all of a second and a half.
Yeah.
So it's effective in its own way. It helps that it's black and white.
This is my favorite piece of trivia I learned recently about Night of the Living Dead. The movie came within a hair of having Tom Savini do the special effects for it. He was engaged to do the effects. He was a friend of Romero's.
He was 10 at the time.
He was pretty young. But what stopped Tom Savini from reporting for duty on that morning when they rolled Night of the Living Dead? He was drafted to go to Vietnam, which I knew he had done, but that was the literal moment where he was forced to leave. He went to Vietnam, he became a combat photographer, which is where he was exposed to the most vile, vicious things that he took pictures of and came back and tried to recreate them. So Savini only joined Romero as his effects artist in the next couple of movies. I think, was Martin prior to...
Martin was, in
prior to Dawn of the Dead?
In that Romero sort of dead zone between the two Dead films, yeah.
But, right, so they started working together. Ultimately, Savini showed up to do Dawn of the Dead and then his masterpiece, Day of the Dead, which has the most effects I've ever seen in one film, barring The Thing.
As far as practical effects go,
Effects. Yeah. These days...
these days, yes, every shot is a special effect, but yeah.
At any rate, so we are talking about Night of the Living Dead, the granddaddy of them all, the first movie that created the zombie rules, the rules of nothing can kill them unless you sever the head or put a bullet in the head.
That everyone who gets bitten ultimately dies of the infection and turns into a zombie.
Is that actually part of the first one?
That there is no more room in hell.
Yes.
Actually,
that's from
Dawn of the Dead,
Dawn of the Dead. Which is, I really like that phrase. I wish they'd reuse it more.
Actually, the concept that anyone who dies for any reason whatsoever comes back as a zombie. The only one, the girl, Karen, the little girl, she's been bitten by a zombie and ultimately dies of the infection and comes back. But we see Johnny at the beginning. He gets kind of his head smashed, which you would think would preclude him from coming back as a zombie because it's a head wound, but he got a ding to the head on a tombstone.
Haven't you seen later zombie movies?
And he does come back despite not being bitten.
Shane and I were discussing these movies the other day, and one of the subjects we brought up was the fact that it only seems to be in the Romero movies where the newly dead seem to retain some form of themselves or some memory. In Night of the Living Dead, the zombies do things. The zombie at the beginning of the movie throws a rock.
Right.
The little girl picks up a trowel and stabs someone to death. This is.
I mean, can you?
Well, she had baby teeth, so you don't want to.
Yeah, I mean, it's less shocking to us now, but if you think about seeing that little girl murdering her parents with a trowel back in the day, back in 1969, 1968.
Yeah.
As a 12-year-old or something who's been dropped off at the theater for an evening.
For an afternoon with kindly Roger Ebert.
That scene is pretty intense, even still today, I think.
Well, Mommy, Daddy, I want to go see a movie with that guy who's making films with Russ Meyer.
Yeah, that classy guy. But yeah, that sequence with the trowel actually reminds me a lot more of Italian cinema. That style of people lifting something slowly and then bringing it down in a camera shot. I also read yesterday a fun bit of trivia fact. When the actress was making the stabbing motion, of course she's stabbing slightly off camera, and she was stabbing into a pillow.
I mean, is that trivia or something that could have been left unsaid?
I just thought it was a funny idea. That little girl being asked, all right, now make a funny face and stab this pillow a lot. And then they threw chocolate syrup at the wall behind her. That's how they created that image.
Yeah, but it is...
the advantage of black and white, I guess. If you have a budget of $6,000, you go for the chocolate syrup.
Shane's well aware of this. At one point, every movie ever made got colorized for a couple of years.
Right.
And when they colorized Night of the Living Dead, they colorized the first zombie.
All of them. All of them are greenish.
They made them green, but in the first scene, when they see that guy walking,
you're not supposed to know it's a zombie.
Johnny's making a joke. Oh, somebody scary is coming. Like that.
Right.
But he's green in the colorized version.
Now, interestingly, there's actually been 3 different colorizations of the film. Only the first one makes the zombies green.
Wow, you know way too much about colorization. And on that note,
and way too many about versions of this film.
Let's take a quick break and listen to these about 60 seconds worth of ads. So, hang on, kids. We'll be right back.
Are you looking for a cozy, comfortable space to study or catch up with some friends? Then look no further than anyone's ass kitchen.
I'm okay. Been really busy, obviously. I'm gonna be less busy in the next couple of weeks.
Well, yeah, as soon as exams are done.
Over, and then I'll have more time.
Is Allison the person that I should be talking to?
Yeah, I'm just gonna email her and CC you and be like, you guys
like
can
that.
talk to each other.
About what?
About getting officially trained as a host
so
that he can host without me when I'm not available.
It's more fun when it's unofficial.
What's unofficial?
When we're breaking the rules.
Oh. I'm imagining you didn't get a chance to listen to us last week.
No, I didn't.
We did a pretty nice show. It was 2 hours, by the way.
Yeah, I know. I saw your.
I
I
mentioned
you messaged me that.
10 seconds. And we're back talking about the 50th anniversary of Night of the Living Dead and related projects.
Like I said, a million branching well, the real first branching sequel happened in the late 70s because Dawn of the Dead was co-produced with a lot of Italian money provided by Dario Argento. And the deal there was that Argento would be able to do his own cut of the film. And if you look, it is findable, the Italian version of Dawn of the Dead, which is much shorter. It excludes any bit of levity whatsoever. And
doesn't it have more headshots?
It does bring in a few more gore effects that are...
It's weird. It means he went out and said, let's shoot some more material.
Well, no, he didn't shoot additional material. It's just stuff that Romero himself had trimmed.
Oh, I see.
Because, their film is dripping with gore as it is. But, you can never have too much if you're Dario Argento. And that film was released in his territories as Zombie, ending with an I, no E at the end. And as a result, there are sequels called Zombie 2 and 3 and 4.
Actually, Night of the Living Dead 3.
There's a 5 as well? Okay.
There's many. One of them is called Zombie 5 or 6.
And it did get to the
birds, and it's a bird movie.
Yeah, it did get to the point where they were just slapping the zombie title onto various horror films that had just been produced. It's like, hey, marketing, we'll call it, it's another zombie sequel, whatever, we don't care.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, the first one, the Lucio Fulci one, the Zombie 2, which is...
Is that the one with the zombie shark fight?
It is indeed. Yeah, that's the famous one. It has 2 things of note in it. One is the effect of the woman getting a big shard of splintered wood in the eye. Everyone seems to like that special effect. And yes, a shark fights a zombie in it because I guess it was the late 70s and everyone was asking themselves the question, who would win in a fight? Zombies or Jaws?
Yeah, it's a truly horrifying scene from the point of view of a person watching footage because they really put a guy in the water with an actual shark. It's really awful.
For probably the guy and the shark.
I don't feel bad for the guy at all. I only feel bad for this shark being wrangled and forced to play this terrible game.
The shark thought it was playtime.
Everybody's got to sacrifice for the film.
It's also
the shark.
really underwhelming.
It's famous for these things, but I will say it is a god-awful, terrible film.
Yeah, you hear... The thing is that if you are a fan of zombie movies growing up as I was, you hear a lot about this movie, Zombie 2, the zombie shark fight, amazing, blah, 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 and then you watch it and you're like, oh... It's like a guy standing near a shark.
Yeah, it's like a guy in tattered clothes with bad makeup standing near a shark, waving his arms in, I don't know, hip-deep water. It's not impressive.
Now, because most of the film takes place on an island, they also try to shoehorn in some voodoo elements to it. Mm-hmm. So, the question I was left with as I was watching the film is, there's always this ominous sort of native drum beat thing happening in the distant background. To which I always said, the zombies are clearly not mobile enough to slap away at some bongos. How are they managing this?
I don't know. Have you been to Mount Royal on a Sunday? There's a large percentage of zombies up there.
I try not to because those people smell worse than the zombies.
That's our little shout out to the Tam Tams.
I love the Tam Tams. You old curmudgeons can talk shit on the
filthy
Tam Tams.
hippies.
I love the Tam Tams.
Let's talk a little bit about the actual people behind the movie.
Oh, I thought you were gonna say behind the Tam Tams.
Yeah, well, we can shoehorn them in as we go. George Romero teamed up with a young man by the name of John Russo, who had his own pretty weird ideas about zombies and where he'd like to go with zombie stuff.
Well, ultimately, because he had co-creator credit, he also had the rights to create sequels to Night of the Living Dead.
Correct.
Which I don't think he was directly involved in. I think he sold the rights so that in 1985 we got Return of the Living Dead.
Yes.
Which is...
weirdly an almost official quasi-sequel.
Yeah, I mean, it directly refers to the events of Night of the Living Dead as having happened, but... they made a film of it, and they changed all the details so they wouldn't get sued by the government.
Yeah, it's...
And so as a result, we have another zombie outbreak, and everyone thinks they know the rules because of the Romero film, but it turns out all the rules are different.
Yeah, that all the zombies are absolutely unkillable.
Yeah, like, the headshots will do nothing to them.
Yeah, exactly. That they smash them.
And they run, and some of them are capable of speech.
That's true. It's been a while since I've seen it. The Return of the Living Dead's kind of a great, weird, funny zombie movie, but it has
it helped enormously that it's written and directed by Dan O'Bannon,
who created Alien,
among other wonderful little genre films.
Yeah, he was a great guy.
And I believe he was one of the people that the Oscars refused to mention when he died.
Yeah, that's insane.
Yeah, that was sickening to me.
But just tell us how you really feel. But the Russo did a few more interesting things. Let's talk first. I have one more comment to make about him, but let's talk first about John Russo got it into his head that he knew better about what Night of the Living Dead should be. So for the 20th anniversary...
30th.
30th anniversary.
Yeah, 1998.
That's right, yeah, 20 years ago. He decided to shoot some new footage and release his own cut of Night of the Living Dead. Now this means he wanted to release a movie with the same running time, so he trimmed 10 minutes out of the film. And I've seen this movie. 10 random
Yeah,
minutes.
well, we should mention the circumstances under which we watched this.
Sure.
So we got together at my place when it came out, having already heard this cut is not terrific. And we watched the original Night of the Living Dead, the original cut of the film, back to back with this new cut, so we could know shot for shot what was different.
Yeah.
And it was shocking. Now, I will say, though, in John Russo and other people from the original production who were involved in this anniversary edition, none of them had really seen any money from the original Night of the Living Dead, partially because of this copyright boo-boo that happened years earlier. So this was sort of a cash grab. Romero had nothing to do with this and did not have his stamp of approval other than saying, yeah, I understand they want to make some bucks. Because we all kind of got screwed on that one.
If we're going to speak about the numbers, Night of the Living Dead was made for something like $100,000 back in 1968. And it made $30 million back in
In $68, yeah.
In 68. And George Romero basically never got paid.
Yeah.
That is insane to me that he couldn't...
Yeah,
even a percentage of that, you know, he pretty much got nothing.
Although it launched his career. So
Yeah.
it's kind of hard to gross about it too
If
much.
there's no Night of the Living Dead, there's no something about vanilla.
Mind you, there's always vanilla.
There's always vanilla.
That was their next film. They decided all the same people who made Night of the Living Dead got together again and said, all the distributors, suddenly the ones who had turned them down were really interested. What's your next project? What's your next project? And it's like, a light romantic comedy. And I said,
Well, you've clearly got the touch. Which is why There's Always Vanilla is such a household name.
Which explains why the whole group split up after that one, and then Romero went on to make a series of horror films until he
You mean a
got
series
the
of films with the word dead in the title?
Well, no.
Any words ahead of them and then ending in the word dead.
No, he did make, like, The Crazies as
sure,
one.
The
He
Crazies.
made Season of the Witch, a.k.a. Jack's wife. Guess which was the more successful title.
And he worked a lot with Stephen King.
Yeah, but I'm talking about before and until he finally said, okay, and now I'm making a sequel to The Night of the Living
That's a
Dead.
good point, yeah. But back to Russo. So Russo made this really weird cut of the film, including new footage that is
There's an opening
extremely
sequence.
amateurishly made.
There's an opening sequence with Bill Hinsman, who played the original zombie, doing an origin story of that zombie.
Yeah, it's rough. It's just like every prequel.
Yeah.
I can't wait to see what this character was like as a child.
No,
What I like about this ominous zombie figure that appears suddenly, that's completely terrifying in its mystery, is that I know enough about its backstory and where it came from. I'd like to see all the moments leading up to that moment in order to remove any tension from it.
and the footage matches so well because it's only been 30 years since Bill Hinsman played that character.
He notoriously cast some horrible non-actor as a giant buck-toothed priest
Oh, yes. With his little dog, Mushu.
who can barely act, is bitten during the new footage, and at the end of the film does not turn into a zombie, so he declares he is above this, that it is a god who is raining down this terror on all of the non-believers. It flies in the face of everything we actually like about these films.
Oh,
It's just so wrong-headed.
it is an atrocity.
So, Russo, this is the one thing I want to say. Russo made this, and when you watch it, you think, well, you're terrible, don't make movies, you don't know what you're doing at all. And Russo has made about 6 films, and I will largely have to just agree with the original thing that his films are quite poor. They are made amateurishly, and yet he made 2 movies that are kind of good. They're both, I think, the first one's called Midnight, and it's essentially just a cult kidnapping and murdering people. But it has a strange power. I've seen it. It is an effectively uncomfortable film. He did a good job on it. When you watch it, though, there will be those moments where you go, oh, you don't know what you're doing. And a few years later, he made a movie with I'd say slightly more of a budget. It's called Heartstopper, and it's about a person who is essentially a vampire who's been alive for a couple hundred years in modern 1978 or 82, whatever year it is, hanging out and murdering girls, and Tom Savini's in the movie as a police officer who's chasing him. So there's a couple of Tom Savini special effects in this movie. And again, it's sort of amateurishly made, but you can't take your eyes off it. It's one of those movies you just kind of... I wouldn't say love to hate it, but I'm mildly amused by that one. Although Midnight is his best work, I guess you'd have to say. Followed by Midnight 2, which was shot on video for $1. And, yeah, a couple of years later he made a movie.
So a bigger budget than the supplemental features in the 30th anniversary of Night of the Living Dead.
At any rate, I have a grudging interest in John Russo's strange amateur career following it. He's also written several novels about the Living Dead, which I have not yet read, but they're around.
I'm sure they get the rules down perfect.
Well, he did write a book called Return of the Living Dead, which I believe has nothing to do with the movie they were making, except for the title being similar. So, I don't know, were there any other collaborators worth mentioning? I mean, to be clear, the actors in Night of the Living Dead went on to do basically nothing.
Right.
Well, it's worth mentioning, you kind of mentioned it earlier, but it's worth mentioning that George Romero didn't really have any history as a film director. He worked in industrial film and advertisement, basically, in the Pittsburgh area at the time, and he and a few other people just kind of scraped together, $6,000 or something, and we're like, oh, let's make a horror movie, and then eventually they ended up getting some investment, which brought the budget up to a whopping $100,000 at some point. I think it's 110 or something like that. So yeah, nobody really involved in the production was a legitimate professional filmmaker, I don't think.
Well, you all start somewhere.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, the movie itself obviously struck a chord with people. One of my favorite movies growing up, for sure. It is very, very bleak, and not just because of the special effects and gore, which now seem a bit laughy, but because of the,
racial tensions
racial tensions were very high in 1968, and it's sort of jaw-dropping almost that the main character of the film is played by a black man.
Yeah,
Dwayne Jones, that's right.
So the
by the way, just to mention it, Dwayne Jones, his favorite radio station, CJLO 1690. Sent us a text earlier.
Listening from the grave right now.
Thanks, Dwayne.
But yeah, so the main character of the film is this black man.
Yeah. Now, notably, it wasn't written to be a black man or necessarily any person of any color, but
much like Ripley in Alien.
That is correct.
Yeah, exactly. So. It was just he was the best person to audition for the role, so they got it. He got it, and they didn't bother to rewrite any of it. So his color never comes up in the film, which is interesting because he gets into some spirited arguments with Cooper.
To be a pretty racist.
Well, a guy who would certainly, if in the context, usually be depicted as the racist.
I might be reading into my recollection might have something to do with the fact that I've seen the 1990 remake of Night of the Living Dead, where that character is overtly racist.
Yeah, I think they do throw in some racist stuff for that.
They cast this actor, Tom Towles, who had just been in Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer, and wow, is that movie full of bigotry and racism. So Tom Towles kind of came with a lot of baggage when you see him play that role. Do we want to talk at all about... do we have anything else to say about the original people, or do we want to jump into the 1990 remake?
Well, I just want to say in relation to the Ben and Cooper disagreement that fuels much of the original film. Thematically, it's interesting. This was pointed out to me years ago, and it's like, oh yeah, that's true. We all side with Ben because he's the much more charismatic, level-headed, reasonable guy, and Cooper is just an ass throughout the film. And yet, ultimately, Cooper's plan, hey, we should just hold up in the basement and wait until help comes, is superior. Ben's plan, which everyone ultimately goes with because he's the more charming leader figure of the group, gets everybody killed.
Yep.
Including himself.
Ultimately. Well, ultimately he does follow Cooper's plan.
Ultimately, Ben doesn't get killed per se. It's something else that happens.
He does end up following Cooper's plan, holding up in the basement. Although at that point he's the last one left.
Mm-hmm.
But Cooper's plan did involve being holed up with a girl who was going to turn to a zombie and
Yeah,
start murdering everyone.
fair enough. But mind you, if everyone was down there when the girl revived, I think they could have handled themselves better than just the mom.
We're really rewriting history here. We don't know that they would have survived if they all went.
Well,
into
you
the
know, you got
basement.
a Monday quarterback, the zombie films. They go, well, I would have done this and I would have done that. I totally would have survived.
Yeah, if I'd been on top of that elevator in Dawn of the Dead, I would have hugged the wall more.
Yeah.
That would have saved me.
When raiders are shooting you through the little elevator hole, you gotta hug the wall closer.
That's right. And speaking of characters who retain memory, that we're really jumping around, but in Dawn of the Dead, a character dies and immediately returns to the place he was just in to go to his secret room.
Yep.
He's like, hey, where's that secret room I was in before?
Because Romero's zombies remember. On some
Yeah.
level, they remember. Unlike the Walking Dead zombies that are truly mindless eating
The
machines.
moment any character on The Walking Dead dies and comes back, they...
There's nothing left of
Not
them.
only that, but on The Walking Dead, they revive almost instantly.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas in the Romero world, it's
It
hours,
takes a
days.
long time, yeah.
There's a long period of waiting around.
But
Well,
if you
they do mention the time varies, and
Yeah.
there are scenes of them waiting to see, oh, is this person coming back? Oh, I guess so.
If you consider the later, less good Romero, or the less good of the Dead movies, Day of the Dead and Land of the Dead.
I think Day of the Dead is the finest zombie movie ever.
Well, if you
I will not
consider
say the same about Land of the Dead.
Land of the Dead is pretty bad. But if you consider it to be the canon, the zombies start forming their own zombie
Right,
society
yeah,
in that
yeah.
movie. They're not just
They
remembering
have they have
things,
one
they're
zombie
using
in that.
tools. They've got the leader zombie that's leading them all to a new zombie paradise.
Yeah, that's a
it
bit
starts to
nuts,
get
I
very...
guess.
Well, you know. If anyone was qualified to say, this is where this story goes, it's Romero. I'm fine.
Oh, I still love that movie.
I adore the original trilogy, and I do like Land of the Dead. However, after that, his final two zombie films, Diary of the Dead and Survival of the Dead, not such a big fan.
I think they both have moments that are fun to watch, but I think the Diary and Survival, but...
Well, I think Land of the Dead is an insane movie, but I still love it, and I still love watching it.
The-
Diary of the Dead, I have trouble getting through. Like,
Yeah.
it's boring.
A lot of it is an old man railing against the internet culture.
Yeah, it's kind
Yeah.
of crazy in that respect. The thing is, I liked Land of the Dead, but it's built on this thing. You're watching the movie and you go, wait, how is that part of the story? There's characters in this who are high society with the scum. And why are they high society? Because apparently they have money. But
Which
most
for
of
some
the,
reason matters in the
most of the
post-apocalyptic
world is
zombie
destroyed. There's money everywhere. You can just walk into it. I think in Dawn of the Dead,
Dawn of the
say
Dead,
money
they
was
literally-
streaming through
Well,
the
yeah, I mean, that's
city.
part of the
They-
whole
yeah,
irony in Dawn of the
They
Dead.
literally
Like,
rob a bank, because you never know.
Right,
Yeah.
but the point being, in Land of the Dead, we've got Dennis Hopper, and he's like, I've got all the money. And I'm like, well, I can just go 2 towns over where it's completely decimated, break into their bank, and take all their money.
Right.
It's meaningless.
Well,
and
the
they
Well,
that-
it may well be part of the point. That
Well,
it's
yeah.
like, yeah,
I
this stuff is meaningless now, and you're still fighting over it.
all of these Romero movies have this kind of underpinning
The message.
The social commentary,
social
yeah.
commentary that I always really loved about Dawn of the Dead and Night of the Living Dead as well. Very
And
powerful.
interestingly, was what Romero hated about The Walking Dead, that he considered it just a soap opera with no underlying message.
There's no underlying message, right?
The underlying message is AMC's making millions.
Exactly.
But yeah, Land of the Dead, it's sort of like he was like, oh, people aren't getting the message enough. Let me just write the message across the screen
Well,
throughout the entire movie.
Let's be clear,
Money is bad.
Romero was never particularly subtle about his social commentary. That Dawn of the Dead is about consumerism.
Is terribly doesn't.
Night of the Living Dead is very much steeped in the '60s turmoil of
Yeah.
America, and which is why it probably has the most written about it, because there are more approaches you can take to that film about what exactly it's about. Whereas Dawn of the Dead being about consumerism, well, no shit, Sherlock.
They're literally in a mall. But I still think you can watch Dawn of the Dead and not think about the commentary, right? You don't.
absolutely.
Oh yeah,
have
it's
to-
a
that doesn't
tremendously,
have to be
it's a
part of
fun
the narrative.
adventure movie.
Exactly. Whereas Land of the Dead, you can't really watch the movie and not think about the social commentary in the film. Which I don't think you should be watching Dawn of the Dead and not thinking about the social commentary, but I think that once your commentary and your film become sort of, one and the same, it starts to be a little bit much.
Indeed.
I think it's a better axe to grind than the axe he has to grind in Diary of the Dead, though. Because it's like, oh, this web thing.
Oh, those kids with the webcams.
Oh, dear. So in 1990, Romero wrote a new script, a new version of the screenplay for Night of the Living Dead, and after shopping it around to a variety of directors, including Peter Yates and a few other people, I think I got that right. Maybe it was Peter Hyams. I mixed these guys up, despite the fact that their careers are nothing alike. He finally settled on letting Tom Savini direct the official remake. And what's interesting about the movie is that it is very close to the original, but it changes some key plot points, a lot of which were what he had in his original script before they shot the 1968.
Well, they're changing specifically in ways that play on your familiarity with the original film. So it's sort of like changes that are themselves fan service. So
so it's like The Last Jedi.
It's the same sort of.
The same way of making.
Fans were delighted in the same sort of way. Actually, no, I am a tremendous fan of the 1990 remake of Night of the Living Dead. I think it's a fine film and a good entry in the series.
Unlike the 1968 film that fell in between MPAA periods, the new film was attacked by the MPAA. They forced them to cut almost all the violence out of the movie. It's still a functional film, but it's missing some key shots, and Savini himself is very disappointed that the work they did isn't on camera.
Right.
A lot of the gore effects and things that they've worked on is just missing.
Although there are still inventive zombie bits in it, and zombie designs in it. One of my favorite being a zombie who gets up out of his coffin at the graveyard. And based on Savini's research, he realized, a lot of the corpses you see dressed in their coffin, the suit that they're wearing isn't properly put on. It's sort of like slightly stitched up the back. So as the zombie walks forward, he ends up stepping on the cuffs of his pants and slowly pulling down this facade of a suit. And you see him from behind, and he's naked.
Yeah, they basically have no back.
Yeah.
So they pull the clothing on over the bodies rather than try to sit them up and dress them.
Right.
And with that, that was an audible ding. Technology.
Those kids in their web.
Yeah, so Savini made this great movie, and one of the big changes was they made the female lead more of a hands-on protagonist, which...
Yeah, Barbara does not turn into, just... Right. The original Barbara just withdraws into a shell and doesn't really come out of it for the rest of the film, whereas the Barbara of the remake, by Patricia Tallman, becomes a almost Ripley-esque ass-kicker.
Which apparently was the original draft of the first Night of the Living Dead, but only upon meeting and auditioning Judith O'Dea did they decide to make her more of a shrinking violet, I guess you'd say. Somebody who's afraid of everything.
Or perhaps someone who is not the strongest in line delivery.
But certainly the end of the remake of Night of the Living Dead makes you think that there could have been a trilogy of movies with her character. Just zombie hunter. I really anticipated. It's like, yes, I would love to see him continue with a remake of, and I normally do not advocate remakes at all. But if there had been a Tom Savini remake of Dawn of the Dead as opposed to the Zack Snyder semi remake that we ultimately got,
are we going to talk about the Zack Snyder remake next?
We could. I mean, it is part of the mass vomiting of zombie films that that subsequently happened by the time that we got fairly into the 90s. At this point, it's ubiquitous to the point where it's like, what zombie film came out this week?
Yeah.
Which one got dropped on Netflix randomly?
Well, what happened was zombies became completely unappealing to the general public for about 20 years. And then Danny Boyle made this strange how do I put it, virus movie. It
Not
was
technically not a zombie movie, yes.
Yeah, but it harkened back to the zombie concept. No, I don't even remember. That must have predated the Dawn of the Dead remake.
We're talking about the film 28 Days Later.
Yes.
For the sake of the
I'm
audience.
not sure anymore, but I remember when 28 Days Later came out, people had this moment of reawakening. Like, wait, this is engaging.
It was part of that shotgunning period that included that. It included the Zack Snyder remake, and it also included,
The
of
Zack Snyder
course...
remake was after 28 Days Later, for sure.
Yeah, well, no, but I mean, within like a few years of each other, what really launched the current spate? We had those, and of course, Edgar Wright's Shaun of the Dead.
Right. Which was 2005, I think. But,
Yeah, well, I'm just saying, within that
I'm just
little window of years.
But at any rate, yeah, the 28 Days Later was the one where I was really struck with, okay, people are remembering they care about this genre. And essentially it's been an onslaught ever since. Once these other films came out, then there were ridiculous numbers of offshoots and remakes of remakes. There was a remake
not to mention from multiple countries.
Yeah.
Like, countries that you wouldn't even normally think, oh, right, a Cuban zombie film called Juan of the Dead, which is actually a lot of fun.
My favorite title, terrible, unwatchable movie, but my favorite title of all of these, a film called Flight of the Living Dead, about a zombie outbreak on a plane.
I am sick and tired of these mother effing zombies on this mother effing plane. Yeah.
Exactly. We're going to take a quick break and do another 60 seconds of promos and ads while you, the listener, get up and go to the bathroom. First time I've ever been 40 seconds early for the ad break. Just seemed like the right moment.
All right.
Let's see. That's gone alright.
There's
You seem
no...
almost engaged. If it was a joke and showed up, you'd be like, why are we talking about this?
No, I love talking about George Romero. I could talk about George Romero for days.
Do you have any other details about him you want to get to?
Yeah. I mean, I have other stuff to say about the movie if we want to go back to it, but I thought...
and just his whole career or anything. Just,
I mean,
We've done the lion's share of bringing up the topics, so if you have anything you want
Yeah, no, if there's more to talk about the original, by all means, because we could fall down a rabbit hole
We're coming
talking
back.
about...
And we're back. We are in the process of dissecting George Romero's 1968 classic, Night of the Living Dead.
And peripherally talking about all the many sequels from various branches and all the rip-offs, which I was just about to say we could fall down a rabbit hole of talking about just the number of films that came out of this one original film.
Tess, is there something you wanted to talk about the original again?
Well, I was just going to mention briefly, because it's kind of funny, that I'm pretty sure that George Romero has credited the sort of inspiration for the film, the original script, to the novel I Am Legend, which was later inspired several other films and was later made into a movie called I Am Legend in 2007.
By the way, just a note, the actual movie I Am Legend in 2007 is the furthest adaptation of the actual
Oh, God,
story.
yeah. No, there is a 1960s Italian film starring Vincent Price called Last Man on Earth, which is a very accurate version of that, largely because the screenplay was written by the book's author, Richard Matheson, uncredited.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, his name is not on the film, even though he wrote that script.
Yeah, I can tell you why. While you might like that film, it's not great. I'm sure
unfortunately, it is the best adaptation of I Am Legend we're ever going to get.
I would say that I have said this about many movies. I will continue to say it about many more. What year was that film?
Oh,
60s?
60s somewhere, I can't remember.
So the 1960s adaptation of I Am Legend would be a great 20-minute short. It is an unbearable 90-minute movie.
It is too long. I will agree
It
with
has
that.
scene after scene after scene of Vincent Price walking down hallways, having arms reach at him that he bats away like they are nothing. There are so many scenes in this movie where he is attacked by groups that he easily fends off and speed walks away from.
Yeah, it should be mentioned that the story of I Am Legend, if you're not familiar, even if you've seen the movie versions,
You're still not familiar.
you're not familiar. It is a vampire apocalypse, not a zombie apocalypse.
Yeah. And it largely takes place with a man hiding in his house. So that's the similarity to Night of the Living Dead. It's being holed up in a house.
Yeah, and Romero's idea was, because I Am Legend is sort of the end game of that, where it's the last man on Earth. Romero decided, well, how about a similar situation, but at the beginning of that sort of apocalypse?
Yeah, the outbreak. By the way, for anyone listening who, if you read books, the novel I Am Legend is about 100 pages, and it is a masterpiece of writing. I don't know if either of you have read it.
Oh yeah, I've read it.
Yeah,
I've read it.
Fantastic.
I've read it more than once, even.
And it has what has to date been an unfilmable ending, which is the whole point of the novel and the actual explanation for the title, which hasn't. They've never even attempted to explain in any of the movies.
In the 2007 film, they did shoot an ending that was the or at least somewhat similar to the book ending, and then in the initial sort of test audio, whatever they call it, test phase of the film, people were like, no, it's too dark. I'm sorry.
Yeah, there's two endings of the Will Smith version. One where the one that they went with, where he nobly sacrifices himself. Whatever, I don't. And by the way, if I'm giving you spoilers, I don't care. It's a shit movie. And the original ending, which interestingly he survives, but it's about him realizing, oh wait a minute, I'm the monster.
Right.
Which is kind of more in keeping with the spirit of the original.
Right.
But if you want a fun version of I Am Legend, the most probably the most ridiculous version of it. It is certainly the farthest removed from the source material, I would say. But it is a lot of fun. I do enjoy the hell out of that film.
Exploitational Charlton Heston 70s
Just-
bad sci-fi movie.
Just watching the opening sequence with Charlton Heston bombing around a vacant LA in his sports car, and then at the first sight of movement, just machine guns the hell out of it. It's like, that's fantastic.
Yeah, he's clearly having a good time in that one. That man got to be in the weirdest movies. Anyways. So in 1968, Romero cobbled together this film with a bunch of people. I did read one other interesting piece of trivia. The night that they finished their cut of the movie and had it on reels ready to be projected, he immediately drove to New York City with his editor in the hopes they could find some cinema, any cinema, willing to project it for an audience. He arrived in New York City, and they changed their minds because that was the night that they learned Martin Luther King had just been shot.
Oh, yes.
So they thought maybe not tonight.
Maybe not this one.
Maybe not this movie with this lead on this
ending.
night. Yeah, exactly. So it's a lot of weird coincidences in terms of timing.
Hey.
But also just the audacity of, we'll just find somewhere to show it tonight. This is going to be great.
Well, that would have been right on the cusp of the midnight movie phenomenon in New York. So, viable.
Sure.
A couple years later, the midnight movies began in earnest when John Lennon, it was the Elgin Theater, and he basically paid for them to start running El Topo.
That's right. I have heard that.
Yeah, the original midnight movie, and then the Elgin became famous for having midnight movies of like stuff like Pink Flamingos
former Beatle John Lennon
yes.
behind this.
Yeah.
And that's I'd love to hear Jodorowsky's.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear his take on John Lennon's influence on his career.
I'm sure Jodorowsky would prefer to take credit for the entire Beatles career. He's that kind of egomaniac.
Yeah, we should do a whole episode about his
Jodorowsky?
Dune movie.
About just the Dune movie? Did you see the documentary about it? Yeah, it was pretty great.
Any. This is just a very fast aside. Anytime a director shows up and is offered many millions of dollars to make a movie and then insists his amateur son should play the lead because I know better than you.
He was an experienced actor, okay? He had been in previous Jodorowsky films.
Playing the naked boy.
Standing in the desert.
In El Topo.
Yeah.
But back to Romero and Savini and and that lovely crew.
Well, we could say the midnight movies. Night of the Living Dead was sort of a prescient early version of what would become this genre of outrageous 1970s films.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm not actually familiar if that was a major midnight movie or not. It was certainly a drive-in movie.
Yeah, it was certainly, yeah, at the time, but it sort of was laying the path of, there's some weird movies coming out of America now, and other points of interest.
Yeah, I mean, it was also one of these independently made movies that inspired everything down the line. As so many people came out of that.
It was the Blair Witch Project of its day.
Exactly.
Yeah, kind of. Especially as far as the money it made.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, to make $30 million in 1968 money is insane.
And distributors must have loved it, because it's like, wow, we don't have to share any of this with the people who actually made it.
Yeah. I do believe the producers got their money, and that Romero just got left out in the cold.
Yeah.
But,
Well, I mostly feel bad for everyone else involved in the film who worked quite hard on it. Romero at least was able to spin it out into a real career, and Russo to a lesser extent.
much lesser. I have a feeling John Russo is not successful by any means.
Come on, that 30th anniversary of Night of the Living Dead made a fortune for him, I'm sure.
I doubt he has money. I doubt he lives well. I mean, he's still around, and he has, if you check the IMDb, he has a couple credits of upcoming things, like a film called Escape of the Living Dead.
Oh, God.
Oh, I believe he's also credited on a script for a movie, which, I doubt this has been shot or ever will be, but it's called Night of the Living Dead 2.
God.
And I would love to see somebody try to make an actual sequel to that in the same low-key terms. I'm really shouldn't. That should never be made. But
Yeah, there's a world where that could be a good thing, but it's not our world.
yeah, I mean, in a world where we've already seen a remake of Day of the Dead, starring Ving Rhames and Minu Suvari as military people who pal around with a zombie for part of that film. Yeah, it's truly among the worst of all of those films. I think there's actually several Day of the Dead quasi-sequel remakes,
Right.
including one that came out last year, starring, I can't think of his name, but one of the actors from That Thing You Do, playing a hateful, misogynist military guy who gets bitten by a zombie and retains his entire memory when he comes back as a zombie and tries to chase down the same woman who escaped from him earlier in the film for scene after scene after scene. I mean, way to live up to the Romero idea.
Well, I am feeling guilty now that I keep saying, well, at least Romero got to spin a career off into it, because he's not a guy who got rich. And considering how much money his ideas ultimately made for a lot of people, especially everyone associated with The Walking Dead, Romero died in comparative poverty. To the point where, he always had trouble getting financing for his films. It didn't help that his original zombie films, especially Dawn of the Dead and Day of the Dead, because he wanted to make them the way he wanted to make them, as gory as he wanted to make them, they got released unrated, which meant that it cut off a lot of avenues for advertising the film, so they never made as much as they could have. They were never able to be budgeted as high as he really wanted, so that he could have done what he wanted.
I mean, go figure, but there's a strange little thing that happened there, which was George Romero wrote a screenplay called Day of the Dead, which was very ambitious and very expensive. And he found producers willing to give him the, let's say it was $30 million in 1985 money, something like that. They were like, sure, we'll do this, but we want it R-rated.
Exactly.
And he refused. And they said, well, we can't give you $30 million. We'll never see it again.
And keep in mind, an R-rated in 85 would have been PG by today's standards.
Right. Mm-hmm. So they said, we can't give you $30 million. We can give you $5. So Romero drastically rewrote the screenplay for A Day of the Dead. He cut huge plot developments out of it. He had zombie armies that were going to be quasi-sentient. They were gonna be able to follow orders and do things. It was going to be like a World War Z level film.
His original concept, all going back to Night of the Living Dead, if he was going to continue with the series, his end goal was always to have a scene where you see a lone zombie shambling over a hill, and then a whole army coming after him with guns. And then you realize, oh wait, no, the shambling zombie is actually a wounded man, and the armed army are all zombies.
Yeah. But my argument is, I think that Day of the Dead is the best piece of work he's done, so he was sort of forced into the situation of rewriting a script and making it entirely character-based, as opposed to... And it still has quite a budget when you look at how much they accomplish.
It looks fantastic.
The most gore effects I've ever seen.
It has the best-looking zombies, period.
And
even up to today's standards, I think the designs are amazing.
It is in an underground military facility which looks 100% functional, and it just is really well written, really bleak, really well directed. I think it's his finest work, and of course it only happened because they wouldn't give him enough money to make the movie he wanted. You know, he wound up making Star Wars because they wouldn't give him the Last Jedi money.
Mm-hmm.
He always had a vision for a more epic scope to a lot of his zombie films. No more evident than there's a scene in Dawn of the Dead where we draw back from the mall to get a wide shot of the place just crawling with zombies. And it's an impressive shot, and there's a lot of zombies and a lot of depth of field. And yet, Romero, it's not what Romero envisioned. They kind of had to beg people to show up. Just say, we'll slap on some zombie music. We just need bodies to fill this shot. And that was as many people as they could muster. And it's impressive, but it's not the epic levels that we would get. Especially in later years when now most of the zombie crowds we see in these movies are CG creations.
Yeah,
where you can just fill the frame with 1 billion zombies, World War Z style.
That's right, and no movie has ever looked more realistic than World War Z.
Jesus.
The blurry mob.
Yeah.
Well, we are coming up on our hour, and I see people entering the studio to commandeer it away from us.
Mm-hmm.
So I've been your quasi-host. I was joined by Shane and Tess today. We all ranted and raved a little bit about... I think we all gave a lot of love to George Romero.
Oh, I love George Romero.
Nobody had a...
Lamentably died just last year. Didn't make it to the 50th anniversary of his original classic, but...
Yeah. But his glasses were getting so thick they were bound to eventually break his neck, I think. Romero ended his days in Toronto, of all places.
He basically became a Canadian towards the end. He was shooting a lot of his late films here.
Yeah, so a little CanCon there. Yeah, it's true, the last couple of movies, including Line of the Dead, I think were all shot.
Yeah, yeah.
All right, well, we are out of time, so thanks for listening in. We'll be back with the 50th anniversary of some other movie next week. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.